Imagine standing at the edge of everything you think you know. The ground beneath your feet. Solid, familiar, reassuring. And then someone pulls back the curtain, and what you see on the other side is not what you expected. It is stranger. It is darker. It is more beautiful and more terrifying than anything your mind had prepared you for. That is what it feels like to look, truly look, at our solar system. Not the sanitized version from school textbooks, with its neat little diagrams and color-coded planets lined up like obedient soldiers. Not the friendly NASA poster hanging on a child's bedroom wall, but the real solar system. The one that scientists are still struggling to explain. The one that keeps revealing secrets that contradict everything we thought we understood. The one that, the more we explore it, the more it seems to be hiding something from us. We live inside a cosmic neighborhood that has been forming, colliding, exploding, and reinventing itself for 4.5 billion years. And only recently, in the last few decades, in the last few years, have we begun to peel back its outermost layers and glimpse what actually lurks beneath the surface of worlds we thought we knew. What we have found is not reassuring. What we have found raises questions that no one has been able to answer. What we have found suggests that the universe operates according to rules that we are only beginning to understand, and that some of those rules point toward possibilities so profound, so unsettling, and so strange that even the scientists who discovered them spent years reluctant to talk about what they had seen. This is not science fiction. Every single discovery you are about to hear is real. Every fact, every measurement, every anomaly has been documented, peer-reviewed, debated, and in many cases, still hotly contested by the brightest minds on Earth. Because that is the thing about the solar system's most unsettling discoveries. They do not resolve neatly. They do not come with tidy explanations. They come with more questions. They come with a creeping realization that the universe is far more complex, far more violent, and far more mysterious than we ever dared to admit. So here is what I want you to do. I want you to suspend everything you think you know. I want you to let go of the comfortable idea that space is just a vast, empty, silent place where planets drift in predictable orbits. Because the truth is far more dramatic than that. The truth is that our solar system is a place of unimaginable violence, of oceans hidden under ice, of moons that breathe, of planets that should not exist where they are, of forces that reshape worlds over billions of years, and of signals and structures that scientists are still trying to explain. The truth is that every time we send a probe deeper into our cosmic neighborhood, we come back not with answers, but with a new kind of awe and a new kind of fear. Let us begin at the very beginning, because to understand why these discoveries are so unsettling, you first need to understand what kind of place our solar system actually is. Picture this. About 4.5 billion years ago, there was no sun, no Earth, no planets, no asteroids. There was only a vast, swirling cloud of gas and dust, a nebula, slowly collapsing under its own gravity. As it collapsed, it began to spin. At its center, material compressed and heated until nuclear fusion ignited and the sun was born. Around it, the remaining dust and gas formed a flat, rotating disk, the protoplanetary disk, and within that disk, tiny grains began to collide and stick together, growing from pebbles into boulders into planetesimals into the worlds we know today. The process took tens of millions of years. It was violent beyond imagination. Collisions were constant and catastrophic. Worlds were shattered and reformed. Some objects were flung outward to the cold, dark edges of the solar system. Others were pulled inward toward the sun. And out of this extraordinary chaos, a solar system emerged. One that looks, on the surface, like it has been resting in peaceful equilibrium ever since. But that is the illusion. Because beneath the apparent calm of our solar system lies a history of cataclysm, and evidence is mounting that this history is far from over. Ask yourself this. When you look up at the night sky and see the moon, that familiar, comforting presence that has watched over humanity since before we were truly human, do you ever wonder where it actually came from? Because the story of the moon's origin is one of the first great unsettling discoveries of our solar system. and it involves a collision so enormous that it makes every disaster movie ever made look like a gentle disagreement between neighbors. The leading theory, and I want to be careful here to emphasize that this is a theory, though it is supported by extensive evidence, is called the giant impact hypothesis. According to this idea, approximately 4.5 billion years ago, when the early Earth was still young, still cooling, still finding its shape, a Mars-sized body collided with it. Scientists have given this body a name, Theia. The impact was not a glancing blow. It was a direct, devastating strike that essentially vaporized the impactor and blasted a massive chunk of Earth's mantle into space. This debris, composed of molten rock and vapor, eventually coalesced into what we now call the Moon. Think about that for a moment. The peaceful, poetic moon that has inspired poets, guided sailors, and governed the tides for billions of years was born from an apocalyptic collision that nearly destroyed the young Earth. The moon is, in the most literal sense possible, a child of catastrophe. And without it, life on Earth as we know it might never have developed. The moon stabilizes Earth's axial tilt, which keeps our climate from swinging into extremes that would make complex life impossible. It drives the tides, which may have played a crucial role in the emergence of life from the oceans. The very thing that makes Earth habitable is the product of a near-extinction event. But here is where it gets even more unsettling. In recent years, scientists analyzing lunar rock samples have found chemical signatures that do not quite fit the giant impact hypothesis in its original form. If Theia hit the Earth and the Moon formed from the debris of both bodies, we would expect the Moon's composition to be different from Earth's, a mixture of Earth material and Theia material. But the Moon's composition is remarkably similar to Earth's, almost as if it were made entirely of Earth rock. This discrepancy has led some researchers to propose alternative versions of the hypothesis, that the impact was so violent it essentially liquefied and mixed both bodies together, creating a homogeneous mix before the Moon condensed from the resulting vapor. Others have proposed that Theia had a composition nearly identical to Earth's, which is statistically unusual but not impossible. And a few researchers have gone further, suggesting models that are frankly difficult to wrap your mind around. Scenarios involving a rapidly spinning proto-Earth, multiple smaller impacts, or processes we have not yet fully understood. As of today, the exact mechanics of the Moon's formation remain one of the most debated questions in planetary science. The Moon has been orbited, landed on, sampled, and studied more than any other world beyond Earth, and we still do not know with certainty where it came from. Now let us move to something that, when scientists first fully grasped its implications, sent a quiet kind of shock through the planetary science community. It is called the Late Heavy Bombardment, and it is the story of a time, roughly 4 billion years ago, about 500 million years after the solar system formed, when the inner solar system was subjected to a catastrophic rain of asteroids and comets. The Moon's surface, which preserves a record of ancient impacts because it has no atmosphere or geological activity to erase them, is covered in craters that date to this period. So is Mars. So, almost certainly, is the early Earth, though plate tectonics has long since destroyed the evidence here. What caused this sudden surge of bombardment? The answer points to something deeply unsettling about the structure of our solar system. For a long time, planetary scientists believed that the giant planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, formed in roughly their current orbits and have stayed there ever since. But evidence accumulated over decades suggests something far more dramatic, that the giant planets migrated, that they moved. That Jupiter, the largest planet in our solar system, a body so massive that it contains more mass than all other planets combined, once orbited closer to the Sun and then moved outward. And as it did, it sent gravitational shock waves rippling through the solar system, destabilizing the orbits of countless asteroids and comets and hurling them inward toward the rocky inner planets. This model, known as the Nice model, named after the city in France where it was developed, suggests that the solar system we inhabit today is not the solar system that originally formed. It was reorganized, reshuffled, and in the process, the inner solar system was bombarded with impacts of unimaginable ferocity. Scientists estimate that during the late heavy bombardment, the Earth may have been struck by objects large enough to vaporize the entire ocean. Not once, but multiple times. And yet, life persisted. In fact, some researchers now believe that life may have first emerged before the late heavy bombardment, been wiped out, and then re-emerged afterward. Or perhaps it survived in deep ocean hydrothermal vents, sheltered from the carnage above. The resilience of life, or whatever preceded life, during this period is itself one of the most astonishing and poorly understood aspects of Earth's history. But what if the nice model is not the full story? What if the migration of the giant planets was even more chaotic, even more violent than we currently understand? Some researchers have proposed that in the early solar system, there may have been not 4 giant planets, but 5, and that the 5th was ejected entirely from the solar system by a gravitational interaction with Jupiter, cast out into interstellar space as a rogue planet. This is not fringe speculation. A study published in 2011 in the Astrophysical Journal by David Nesvorny suggested that the 4 giant planet model has difficulty reproducing the current architecture of the solar system, while a model starting with 5 giant planets gives a better match. We may be living in a solar system that lost a planet, a ghost planet that once roamed these same spaces and was banished to the infinite dark between the stars. Ask yourself, if that 5th planet exists somewhere in the interstellar void, unimaginably far from any sun, cold and dark and silent, what might it look like now? And is there any way we would ever find it? Let us turn now to a world that has fascinated and disturbed scientists more than almost any other in our solar system. A world where it rains glass, where winds blow at 2,000 kilometers per hour, where the night side is so cold it can freeze iron from the atmosphere, and the day side is hot enough to melt lead. I am talking about HD 189733b. Except, wait, that is an exoplanet, not part of our solar system. What I should be talking about, and what is far closer to home, is Venus. Because Venus, our nearest planetary neighbor, the second planet from the Sun, the planet that from a distance glows so beautifully in the evening sky that ancient peoples called it the morning star and the evening star, and sometimes believed it was 2 different celestial objects. Venus is one of the most profoundly disturbing places in the entire solar system. Let us start with the basics, because even the basics are deeply strange. Venus is almost exactly the same size as Earth, has almost exactly the same mass. It formed in the same neighborhood of the solar system, from the same raw materials, at roughly the same time. In the early days of solar system exploration, scientists genuinely expected Venus to be Earth's twin, perhaps a warmer, lusher world, possibly even harboring life. Science fiction writers imagined a jungle Venus, a Venus covered in swamps and oceans, a Venus that might be a kind of ancient Earth. What they found instead was hell. The surface temperature on Venus is approximately 465 degrees Celsius, about 869 degrees Fahrenheit. This is hot enough to melt lead. It is hotter than Mercury, even though Mercury is nearly twice as close to the Sun as Venus. The reason? The most extreme runaway greenhouse effect in the solar system. Venus's atmosphere is composed primarily of carbon dioxide, with clouds of sulfuric acid, and it is crushingly dense. The atmospheric pressure at Venus's surface is about 92 times greater than at Earth's surface. It is equivalent to being almost a kilometer underwater here on Earth. Every probe we have ever landed on Venus has been destroyed by this environment within hours, and sometimes within minutes. The Soviet Venera program sent a series of landers to Venus in the 1970s and 1980s, and those spacecraft, some of the most ambitious planetary engineering ever attempted, were built to withstand the crushing pressure and searing heat. The Venera landers returned images from the surface. They show a flat, rocky landscape bathed in a hellish orange glow, the light filtering through the thick acidic clouds above. Some of the landers managed to transmit data for over an hour before the heat and pressure destroyed their electronics. One of them, Venera 13, managed to survive for over 2 hours on the Venusian surface. 2 hours in a place where everything wants to kill you. It took audio recordings. Scientists have analyzed these recordings and claim to have detected the sound of the Venusian wind, a faint, eerie sound that represents one of the strangest and most haunting audio recordings ever captured by human technology. But the truly unsettling thing about Venus is not what it is. It is what it suggests about what it might have been. Because the evidence increasingly suggests that Venus was not always this way. Planetary scientists have found geological evidence suggesting that Venus may once have had liquid water on its surface. Not for a brief period, but possibly for billions of years. Some models suggest that Venus could have been a habitable, Earth-like world for as long as 3 billion years, longer than complex life has existed on Earth. And then something happened. The planet underwent a runaway greenhouse effect, possibly triggered by increased solar output as the sun slowly brightened over billions of years, or possibly by a massive volcanic event that pumped enormous quantities of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, or possibly by some combination of factors we have not yet fully untangled. The oceans evaporated. The water vapor itself acted as a powerful greenhouse gas, trapping more heat, which drove more evaporation, which trapped more heat. A vicious, irreversible cycle that transformed a potentially habitable world into the scorched hell we observe today. Now here is the question that should keep you up at night. If Venus was once habitable, could life have emerged there? And if life emerged on Venus, what happened to it? Is it possible, and I want to emphasize this is speculation, but it is speculation taken seriously by some planetary scientists, that microbial life once existed on Venus, and that as conditions deteriorated, some of that life adapted, and exists today not on the surface but floating in the relatively temperate cloud layers 50 kilometers above the surface, where temperatures and pressures are within ranges that Earth microbes can survive. This is not an idle fantasy. In 2020, a team of researchers led by Jane Greaves of Cardiff University announced the detection of phosphine gas in the Venusian atmosphere. Phosphine on Earth is produced almost exclusively by biological processes and by high-temperature industrial chemistry. On Venus, the conditions for industrial chemistry do not exist. The announcement sent the scientific community into an immediate uproar. Some researchers celebrated it as the first potential evidence of life beyond Earth. Others immediately began looking for errors. And the debate has been fierce, unresolved, and ongoing. Subsequent analyses have questioned whether the phosphine signal was real or an artifact of the data processing. Some papers have argued the signal disappears when analyzed differently. Others have maintained it is genuine and significant. As of now, we do not know. The Venusian clouds remain one of the great unanswered mysteries, and there are missions planned, including from NASA and the European Space Agency, to return to Venus and try to resolve the question once and for all. But before we leave Venus, there is one more thing you should know, one more detail that scientists discovered relatively recently and that shifted their understanding of what makes a planet alive or dead. Venus rotates. Slowly, barely, in the wrong direction. Retrograde rotation, meaning the sun rises in the west and sets in the east, but it rotates. And yet it has no magnetic field. Earth has a magnetic field generated by the movement of molten iron in its outer core. This magnetic field protects us from the solar wind, from the constant stream of charged particles the sun blasts outward. Without our magnetic field, the solar wind would slowly strip away our atmosphere. Venus has no such protection. Its atmosphere, ironically dense as it is today, is being eroded from the top by the solar wind even now. Some researchers believe Venus lost its magnetic field when its interior cooled too quickly, causing its core to solidify, halting the convection currents that generate a magnetic dynamo. Why Venus cooled differently from Earth, despite being so similar in size and composition, is another question to which we do not yet have a satisfying answer. Some researchers speculate that Venus has no plate tectonics, another major difference from Earth, and that without plate tectonics to recycle carbon back into the mantle, carbon accumulated in the atmosphere over billions of years until the greenhouse effect became catastrophic. Venus is, in this interpretation, an Earth that ran out of ways to regulate itself, a cautionary tale written in fire and acid, hanging in our sky every evening. Now let us go somewhere colder. much, much colder. If Venus represents the most hellish place in our solar system, then the moons of Jupiter and Saturn represent something almost more disorienting. The realization that worlds we thought were frozen, dead, and irrelevant are in fact among the most complex and potentially life-harboring places in the entire solar system. And chief among these is Europa. Europa is one of Jupiter's 4 largest moons, the Galilean moons, discovered by Galileo Galilei in 1610 using one of the first astronomical telescopes ever built. For most of the centuries that followed, Europa was thought to be a frozen, geologically inactive ball of ice, unremarkable except for its smooth surface. But in 1979, the Voyager probes flew past Jupiter and returned the first close-up images of Europa, and those images showed something unexpected. The surface of Europa was covered not in the random, ancient craters you would expect of a dead world, but in a complex network of cracks, ridges, and bands that looked, and planetary scientists chose this word very deliberately, like the surface of a frozen sea, like sea ice, like the Arctic Ocean in winter. The implication was staggering, and it took years for the scientific community to fully accept it. But by the time the Galileo spacecraft arrived at Jupiter in the 1990s and spent years studying Europa in detail, the evidence had become overwhelming. Beneath Europa's icy surface, there is a liquid ocean. A global ocean of liquid salt water, kept liquid not by the warmth of the distant sun. Jupiter is 5 times farther from the sun than Earth is, and Europa receives only a tiny fraction of the solar energy Earth receives, but by a phenomenon called tidal heating. As Europa orbits Jupiter, the immense gravitational pull of the giant planet flexes and squeezes Europa's interior, generating heat through friction. This tidal heating is so powerful that it keeps an ocean beneath the ice liquid, an ocean that scientists now estimate contains more liquid water than all of Earth's oceans combined. Think about what that means. Under a shell of ice that may be 10 to 30 kilometers thick, in a world that from the outside looks frozen and dead, there is a vast ocean of liquid water. Water that has been liquid, perhaps, for billions of years. Water that sits above a rocky seafloor that is almost certainly geologically active, likely dotted with hydrothermal vents where chemical energy pours from the interior of the moon into the water above. On Earth, hydrothermal vents support entire ecosystems: shrimp, crabs, tube worms, bacteria, that derive their energy not from sunlight but from chemical reactions. These ecosystems exist in complete darkness, under crushing pressure, in superheated water. They are alive. They are thriving. And they suggest a profound possibility, that life does not require sunlight. That life, wherever there is liquid water and chemical energy, might find a way. Is there life in Europa's ocean? We do not know. We have never been there. We have never drilled through the ice. We have never sent a probe into those dark waters. But the circumstantial evidence is compelling enough that Europa is widely considered one of the top candidates in the solar system for extraterrestrial life. And the discovery that it harbors an ocean was not a minor footnote. It was one of the most significant and unsettling realizations in the history of planetary science, because it shattered the assumption that the only habitable zone in a solar system is the narrow band around a star where liquid water can exist on a planet's surface. If Europa has a habitable ocean, then habitable environments might exist throughout the outer solar system, around every gas giant, wherever tidal heating is sufficient. The solar system's habitable zone expanded overnight from a thin ring to an enormous volume of space. But Europa is only the beginning. Because when the Cassini spacecraft arrived at Saturn in 2004 and began studying that planet and its moons in unprecedented detail, it made a discovery so astonishing that even the scientists who spent years analyzing the data have described the moment they understood what they were seeing as one of the most profound experiences of their professional lives. The moon in question was Enceladus, a small, unassuming moon of Saturn, only about 500 kilometers in diameter, so small it could fit inside the state of Texas. And what Cassini found was that Enceladus was actively erupting. Not lava, not gas, water. Liquid water, fountains of it, geysers of it, shooting from cracks near the moon's south pole into space at speeds of over 1,400 kilometers per hour, creating a vast plume of water vapor, ice particles, and organic molecules that extended thousands of kilometers into space and actually fed one of Saturn's rings, the E ring. When scientists analyzed the composition of this plume, and they did because Cassini actually flew through it multiple times, sampling it with its instruments, what they found was extraordinary. The plume contained water, of course, but it also contained organic molecules, complex carbon-based compounds, the building blocks of life. It contained molecular hydrogen, which is a potential energy source for microbial life. And it contained silica nanoparticles that could only have formed in liquid water at temperatures above 90 degrees Celsius. Meaning that somewhere deep inside Enceladus, not only is there liquid water, but there is hot water. There are hydrothermal systems. There is exactly the kind of environment where life arose on Earth. Scientists have described the plume of Enceladus as essentially broadcasting the contents of its subsurface ocean into space, a cosmic advertisement that says, "Here's what I'm made of, come and see." And what it is made of ticks nearly every box that astrobiologists consider necessary for life. To this day, Enceladus remains, alongside Europa, the most promising place in the solar system to search for life beyond Earth. And the fact that we discovered this not from a landed probe, not from a drill, not from a sample return mission, but simply by flying a spacecraft through a plume of water erupting from a tiny moon that most planetary scientists had considered geologically boring, makes the discovery feel almost like the solar system was trying to show us something. Trying to get our attention. Now ask yourself this question. If life exists in the ocean of Enceladus, if even microbial life has taken hold in those dark, warm waters, what would that mean for us? What would it mean for the uniqueness of life? For the idea that we are alone? Because if life has appeared independently twice in the same solar system, once on Earth and once on Enceladus, then the probability that life arises wherever conditions allow becomes not a cosmic accident, but something close to a rule. And if it is a rule, if life is as common as water and chemistry, then the universe is teeming with it, and the silence we have heard from the sky for all of human history becomes not evidence of loneliness, but a mystery of an entirely different and more troubling kind. Let us stay in the outer solar system for a while longer, because there is more, so much more, and some of the strangest discoveries are yet to come. Titan, the largest moon of Saturn, and one of the most bizarre worlds in the solar system. When the Huygens probe descended through Titan's atmosphere on January 14, 2005, making it the most distant landing of a human-made object at that time, a record it held for years, it revealed a world that looked, in many ways, astonishingly Earth-like. Not because it has blue skies and liquid water oceans, it does not, but because it has weather. It has rivers and lakes and seas and rain and erosion, and a complex cycle of evaporation and precipitation. It has dunes sculpted by wind. It has shorelines and deltas and floodplains. It looks, in the false color images returned by Huygens and Cassini, like a place where geography means something. A place where landscapes tell stories. The difference is the chemistry. Titan's atmosphere is thick and orange, laden with nitrogen and complex organic molecules, called tholins, created when ultraviolet light from the sun interacts with the nitrogen and methane in the atmosphere. The temperature on Titan's surface is approximately -179 degrees Celsius, cold enough that instead of water, the liquid that fills Titan's rivers, lakes, and seas is methane and ethane. Liquid hydrocarbons. Titan has hydrocarbon lakes near its poles. The largest, Kraken Mare, is larger than the Caspian Sea. Titan has rain, but it rains methane, not water. Titan has seasons. They last for about 7 Earth years, and during different seasons, the distribution of its hydrocarbon lakes changes, as methane evaporates from the summer pole and condenses near the winter pole. Could there be life on Titan? Not as we know it. But some scientists have speculated. And again, I want to be clear, this is speculation, provocative and interesting but not established science, that life might exist in Titan's liquid methane lakes in a form so different from Earth life that we would barely recognize it. Such life would not use water as its solvent. It would not use oxygen for energy. It would have a completely different biochemistry from anything we have ever studied. It would be alien in the truest sense of the word. Researchers at Cornell University published a paper in 2015 proposing the theoretical framework for such methane-based life, suggesting that a cell membrane made of small organic nitrogen compounds called azotosomes could function in liquid methane the way our phospholipid cell membranes function in water. This was a thought experiment, a theoretical exercise, not evidence of life. But it demonstrated that the possibility is not physically absurd, and that Titan is worth taking seriously as an astrobiological target. And to that end, NASA has approved a mission called Dragonfly, a rotorcraft lander that will fly through Titan's thick atmosphere like a drone, exploring multiple sites across the moon's surface. Dragonfly is expected to launch in the late 2020s and arrive at Titan in the 2030s. It will search for signs of prebiotic chemistry, the chemical building blocks that might precede life. And whatever it finds will be extraordinary. But Titan has one more secret that I want to tell you about, because it is one of the strangest and most counterintuitive things in the entire solar system. Under Titan's thick outer ice crust, there may be another liquid water ocean, similar to what we find under the ice of Europa and Enceladus. So Titan may be a world with two completely different potential habitable environments: a deep subsurface liquid water ocean, and a surface covered in liquid methane lakes and seas. Two radically different environments on the same world. The possibility that these two environments could harbor two completely different kinds of life that we have never imagined, is the kind of thing that makes planetary scientists lose sleep in the best possible way. Now let us talk about something that, when it was first proposed, was met with deep skepticism and even ridicule, and then, as evidence accumulated, gradually transformed into one of the most debated and contentious theories in modern astronomy. I'm talking about Planet 9, or, depending on how you look at it, the gravitational ghost. It begins with the Kuiper Belt, the vast region of icy bodies that lies beyond the orbit of Neptune, extending from about 30 to 50 astronomical units from the Sun. 1 astronomical unit, or AU, is the average distance from the Earth to the Sun, about 150 million kilometers. The Kuiper Belt is home to Pluto, to Eris, to Makemake, to Haumea, and to countless smaller icy bodies. It is, in many ways, the outer edge of the familiar solar system. Beyond the Kuiper Belt lies an even more distant and diffuse region called the scattered disk, and beyond that, the hypothetical Oort cloud, a vast shell of trillions of icy bodies extending perhaps a quarter of the way to the nearest star. We have never directly observed the Oort cloud. We infer its existence from the behavior of long-period comets, which appear to come from every direction of the sky, suggesting they originate in a roughly spherical shell surrounding the solar system. But in 2016, astronomers Konstantin Batygin and Mike Brown at the California Institute of Technology published a paper that sent the planetary science community into a state of excited controversy. They had been studying a group of extreme trans-Neptunian objects, distant icy bodies in orbits far beyond Neptune, and they noticed something peculiar. 6 of these objects, despite being in orbits that seemed completely unrelated, had something in common. Their orbits were all clustered together in a very particular way, all pointing in roughly the same direction of space, all tilted at similar angles relative to the plane of the solar system. The probability of this clustering occurring by chance, Batygin and Brown calculated, was only about 0.007%. The explanation they proposed was radical. There is a 9th planet, a large, undiscovered planet, perhaps 10 times the mass of Earth, orbiting the Sun at an enormous distance, perhaps between 400 and 800 astronomical units or even farther. And it is the gravitational influence of this planet that is shepherding the orbits of those distant icy objects into the configuration we observe. Planet 9, if it exists, would be a super-Earth or a mini-Neptune. A planet considerably larger than Earth but smaller than Neptune, orbiting the Sun in a highly elongated ellipse that takes it anywhere from roughly 200 to over 1,000 astronomical units from the Sun. At its most distant point, it would be so far from the Sun that it would receive almost no sunlight at all. A frozen, dark world, invisible to current telescopes, lurking at the outer edge of our solar system. The implications are profound. If Planet 9 is real, it would be the largest undetected object in the solar system since Neptune was discovered in 1846. It would mean that our solar system has a major planet that we have not yet seen, hidden in plain sight, or rather, hidden in the profound darkness of interstellar near space. And it raises an immediate and fascinating question. How did it get there? Most models suggest it was an ice giant, similar to Uranus or Neptune, that formed closer to the Sun in the early solar system and was then gravitationally scattered outward, perhaps by an interaction with Jupiter, to its current distant orbit. This would actually explain one of the long-standing puzzles of our solar system. Why Uranus and Neptune are so much less massive than our models of solar system formation predict they should be. If some of their mass was incorporated into a fifth giant planet that was then ejected, you begin to see how this puzzle might connect to Planet 9. But here is the complicating factor, and it is the kind of complication that makes science simultaneously frustrating and fascinating. Not everyone is convinced. Some researchers have argued that the clustering of the distant trans-Neptunian objects is a selection bias, that we are more likely to observe objects in certain parts of the sky, and that if we correct for this bias, the clustering disappears and there is no need to invoke Planet 9. Other analyses have argued the clustering is real but can be explained by the collective gravity of the Kuiper belt itself, without requiring a hidden large planet. The debate continues. Planet 9 has not been found, despite extensive searches. But it has also not been ruled out. And every year, more sophisticated surveys of the outer solar system are conducted, pushing ever deeper into the dark, looking for the gravitational ghost that may or may not be waiting out there. In the meantime, some researchers have gone even further. Perhaps too far, or perhaps exactly far enough, it is hard to know. Jakob Schultz of the University of Durham and James Onwin of the University of Illinois at Chicago published a paper in 2019 suggesting that Planet 9 might not be a planet at all. It might be a primordial black hole, a black hole formed in the very early universe, in the first second of the Big Bang, before any stars or planets existed. Such a primordial black hole would have the mass of a planet but would be extraordinarily compact, perhaps the size of a bowling ball, and would be nearly impossible to detect directly. Its gravitational effects on surrounding objects would be identical to those of a planet. The researchers suggested that the clustering of the trans-Neptunian objects could be explained just as well by a bowling ball-sized black hole as by a large hidden planet. This idea is, by mainstream standards, quite speculative, but it is not impossible. And the idea that our solar system might harbor a primordial black hole, a remnant of the very first moments of the universe, lurking unseen in the outer solar system, is the kind of thought that, once it enters your mind, is very difficult to dislodge. Now let us turn to something that I find almost more unsettling than any of these distant mysteries, because it happened right here, in the neighborhood of the inner solar system, and it was only discovered relatively recently. I'm talking about the Great Tack Hypothesis, and what it suggests about what our solar system, and possibly our own existence, owes to the migration of Jupiter. We have already discussed the idea that Jupiter migrated in the early solar system. But the Great Tack Hypothesis, developed by planetary scientists Kevin Walsh, Alessandro Morbidelli, and their colleagues, takes this much further. According to this model, Jupiter did not simply drift outward from its original orbit. It first migrated inward, toward the Sun, moving from its original position at perhaps 3 or 4 astronomical units all the way inward to around 1.5 astronomical units, which is right at the inner edge of the asteroid belt's current location. And as it migrated inward, Jupiter swept up material, clearing the inner solar system, and likely destroyed an enormous number of early rocky planets or planetary embryos that had been forming in the inner solar system. Then, Saturn, which had been forming further out, began migrating inward as well, caught up with Jupiter, and the two planets became locked in a gravitational resonance, a synchronized gravitational relationship that reversed Jupiter's inward migration and sent both planets moving outward together. Jupiter retreated, tacking like a sailboat changing direction, leaving in its wake an inner solar system swept of much of its original material. This is deeply unsettling because it suggests that our solar system was supposed to look very different. Without Jupiter's inward then outward migration, the inner solar system might have had more material, which would have produced larger, more massive rocky planets, what some models call super-Earths. Super-Earths are the most common type of planet in our galaxy, observed around many other stars. But our solar system has none. Mars, which might have been expected to grow much larger, much more massive than it is instead a small, thin atmosphere, geologically dead world. The Great Tack Hypothesis suggests that Jupiter's migration is the reason. It swept out the material that Mars needed to grow, leaving it stunted and small. And here's the part that should make you pause. If Jupiter had not migrated, if it had stayed in its original orbit, the inner solar system would likely have been populated with super-Earths, massive, rocky worlds with thick atmospheres and strong gravity. Earth as we know it might not exist. The specific combination of conditions that makes Earth habitable, its size, its water content, its moon, its magnetic field, its plate tectonics, might not have arisen in a solar system with super-Earths. Jupiter's wandering migration may, in a very real sense, be the reason we are here. And yet, Jupiter also represents a profound danger to the inner solar system. Because while its gravity may have helped clear the inner solar system of debris in the distant past, it also continuously perturbs the orbits of asteroids in the asteroid belt, occasionally sending them on trajectories that bring them across the orbits of the inner planets. Jupiter is, in this dual role, both a protector and a threat, a planetary guardian that occasionally turns on its wards. The debate about whether Jupiter is a net protector or a net threat for Earth is one that has gone back and forth for decades. The original idea, popularized in part by the astronomer George Wetherill in the 1990s, was that Jupiter acts as a shield, its gravity capturing or deflecting comets and asteroids that would otherwise strike Earth. This became known as the Jupiter Shield Hypothesis, and it was embraced by researchers looking for an explanation for why Earth has been habitable long enough for complex life to evolve. But subsequent computer simulations complicated the picture. Research by Jonathan Horner and Barry Jones of the Open University, published in the 2000s, found that in some simulations, a Jupiter-less solar system actually resulted in fewer asteroid impacts on Earth, not more. Because Jupiter was responsible for scattering asteroids from their original stable orbits into Earth-crossing trajectories. The truth, it seems, is somewhere in the middle. Jupiter reduces the rate of some types of impacts while increasing others. Its net effect on Earth's bombardment rate over geological time is complex, and we do not yet have a clear, definitive answer. What we do know is that Jupiter's gravity has shaped every aspect of the inner solar system's history, and continues to do so today. Let us now travel to the red planet, because Mars holds some of the most haunting and thought-provoking discoveries in our solar system. A world that, the more we study it, the more it seems to have once been something utterly different from what it is today, and the more mysterious its transition becomes. Mars today is a cold, dry, thin-atmosphered desert. Its surface pressure is less than 1% of Earth's. Its average temperature is around -60 degrees Celsius. It has no liquid water on its surface, no protective magnetic field, and it is constantly bombarded by ultraviolet radiation and cosmic rays that would be lethal to most life as we know it. It is, on the surface, and I mean that literally and figuratively, hostile to life. But it was not always this way. The evidence for a radically different Mars in the ancient past is written all over its surface, preserved in the rock record with extraordinary fidelity because Mars, unlike Earth, has relatively little geological activity to erase it. The southern highlands of Mars are among the oldest surfaces in the solar system, over 4 billion years old, and they are covered in dried riverbeds, valley networks, ancient lake basins, and delta formations that could only have been carved by flowing liquid water. The Hellas Planitia Basin, a vast impact crater in the southern hemisphere, shows signs of having once been filled with a liquid. The Jezero crater, where NASA's Perseverance rover is currently operating, was once a lake, and at its edge, there is a remarkably well-preserved river delta where sediment was deposited by an ancient river that flowed into the lake. If there was ever a microfossil preserved somewhere in the solar system beyond Earth, Jezero crater is one of the best places to look. The sheer scale of Mars's ancient water system is breathtaking. The northern lowlands of Mars, a vast, smooth plain that occupies much of the planet's northern hemisphere and sits several kilometers below the elevation of the southern highlands, have long been suspected to have been an ancient ocean. Called the Vastas Borealis, This northern ocean is thought by many researchers to have covered perhaps a third of Mars's surface, reaching depths of up to a kilometer or more in places. It would have been a shallow but enormous inland sea, surrounded by shorelines, fed by rivers flowing down from the southern highlands. If Mars had an ocean, if it had rivers and lakes in a water cycle, it almost certainly also had a thicker atmosphere, because liquid water requires atmospheric pressure and warmth to exist on a surface. Where did this atmosphere go? The answer lies in another discovery that took scientists years to fully understand. Mars lost its magnetic field. About 4 billion years ago, for reasons that are still debated, Mars's global magnetic field collapsed. Some researchers attribute this to the cooling and solidification of the planet's small iron core, which halted the convective currents that drive a dynamo. Others have proposed that one or more massive impacts during the late heavy bombardment disrupted Mars's interior in ways that terminated its dynamo. Whatever the cause, without a magnetic field, the solar wind, that constant stream of charged particles from the sun, began to strip Mars's atmosphere away, ion by ion, molecule by molecule. Over billions of years, the atmosphere thinned dramatically. The planet cooled. The water could no longer remain liquid on the surface. It retreated underground, freezing into permafrost, or escaped into space as water molecules were dissociated by ultraviolet radiation and their hydrogen atoms blown away by the solar wind. The oceans dried. The rivers stopped. The planet died. The MAVEN spacecraft, Mars Atmosphere and Volatile Evolution, a NASA orbiter that arrived at Mars in 2014, has been measuring exactly this process, studying how the solar wind interacts with Mars's upper atmosphere today and estimating the rate at which it is being eroded. The results have allowed scientists to reconstruct the history of Mars's atmospheric loss with unprecedented precision. The conclusion is sobering. Mars has lost most of a potentially habitable atmosphere to space erosion over the past 4 billion years. This is not an abstract discovery. It is the story of a planet that once had the potential to host life, and that was slowly and inexorably destroyed by forces that Earth, with its magnetic field, has been protected from. And this brings us to one of the most profound and disturbing findings about Mars, one that has been debated since it was first announced in 1996 and that continues to reverberate through the scientific community. ALH 84001, the rock from Mars that might have changed everything. In 1984, a meteorite was found in the Allen Hills region of Antarctica, one of the best places on Earth to find meteorites because the dark rocks stand out against the white ice. This meteorite, catalogued as ALH 84001, was initially classified and set aside. It was only years later that researchers determined it was not just any meteorite. It was a piece of Mars, blasted off the planet's surface by an ancient impact and traveling through space for millions of years before landing on Earth. ALH 84001 is about 4 billion years old. It solidified from a Martian volcano in the very early history of Mars, when the planet still had liquid water. In 1996, a team of NASA researchers led by David McKay published a paper in the journal Science with a dramatic claim that ALH 84001 contained evidence of ancient Martian biological activity. The evidence they presented included polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which are organic compounds associated with biological decay, carbonate globules that could have been formed by microbial activity, magnetite crystals arranged in chains, similar to structures produced by magnetotactic bacteria on Earth, and, most controversially, tiny structures that resembled very, very small, the fossilized remains of bacteria. The paper was cautious in its claims, noting that none of these features alone was proof of life, but arguing that together they built a circumstantial case. The announcement was made at a press conference organized by NASA and the White House. President Bill Clinton made a public statement about the potential discovery of Martian life. It was one of the most dramatic moments in the history of space science, a moment where the question of life on Mars seemed to shift from speculation to something with a tangible, touchable, testable piece of evidence lying on a laboratory bench. The world paid attention in a way that it rarely does for scientific discoveries. And then the backlash began. Over the following years, one by one, the lines of evidence in McKay's paper were challenged and, in many cases, effectively undermined by alternative explanations. The polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, other researchers argued, could have been contamination from Earth or formed by non-biological chemistry. The carbonate globules could have formed by purely chemical processes. The magnetite crystals, though similar in some ways to those produced by magnetotactic bacteria, had features that distinguished them from biological magnetite. And the tiny structures, the would-be microfossils, were so small, smaller than any known bacterium, that many scientists argued they were too small to contain the biochemical machinery necessary for life. The scientific consensus shifted away from McKay's interpretation. LH84001 went from being potentially the most important rock in human history to being, in the mainstream view, a fascinating piece of early Mars with no evidence of life. But here is what keeps the story alive. The consensus has never been unanimous. David McKay defended his interpretation until his death in 2013. His colleague Kathy Thomas-Skepperda has continued to publish research supporting the biological origin of at least some of the magnetite crystals in the meteorite. And some researchers have pointed out that the criteria used to dismiss the biological evidence apply a double standard, that we do not demand such extraordinary levels of proof for geological explanations, and that we should not be so quick to rule out biology when the evidence is ambiguous rather than clearly non-biological. The truth is, ALH84001 has never been definitively proven to contain evidence of life, nor has it been definitively proven to contain no evidence of life. It remains, 28 years after its dramatic announcement, an open question. And open questions, in science, have a way of eventually being answered in ways you did not expect. Meanwhile, the search for life on Mars has continued through generations of rovers and landers. The Mars Science Laboratory rover Curiosity, which landed in Gale Crater in 2012, has made a series of extraordinary discoveries about Mars's ancient habitability. It found organic molecules preserved in ancient sedimentary rocks, complex organic compounds that could be the building blocks of life, or could be the products of life, or could be entirely non-biological. It found evidence of methane in Mars's thin atmosphere. Methane that fluctuates seasonally and occasionally spikes to levels detectable from orbit. The origin of this methane is deeply puzzling, because methane is chemically reactive and breaks down quickly in Mars's atmosphere. Its continued presence suggests an active source, either geological or, provocatively, biological. The Perseverance rover, currently operating in Jezero Crater, is collecting rock and soil samples for eventual return to Earth, a mission that could, in the 2030s, finally give scientists enough material to determine once and for all whether Mars ever hosted life. But ask yourself, what if it did? What if Perseverance's tubes, when they are finally opened in a laboratory on Earth, contain clear, unambiguous evidence of ancient Martian microbial life? A fossilized cell, an isotopic signature unmistakably produced by metabolism, a biomarker with no conceivable non-biological explanation. What would that mean? It would mean that life arose twice, independently, in our solar system. And if it arose twice in one solar system, in one corner of one galaxy, the statistical implication is that the universe is filled with life. That the cosmos is, in the deepest sense, a living place. And that our loneliness, the loneliness that has defined the human experience of gazing at the stars, is an illusion. A very long, very convincing illusion, but an illusion nonetheless. And if we discover that life on Mars and life on Earth share a common ancestor, that life traveled between the planets on meteorites in a process called lithopanspermia, and that we are, in the most literal biological sense, related to Martians, what would that mean for our sense of identity? For our sense of origin? For our place in the universe? These are not idle questions. They are questions that planetary scientists genuinely grapple with as they sit in their labs, analyzing data from a red planet 56 to 401 million kilometers away, depending on where we are in our respective orbits. Let us now venture to some of the strangest terrain in the solar system, the asteroids and the things they have taught us that we never expected to learn. For much of the history of astronomy, asteroids were considered minor and unimportant. the debris of the solar system, the cosmic equivalent of scrap left over from planetary construction. But over the past few decades, the study of asteroids has produced a series of surprises that have fundamentally changed our understanding of the solar system's history and, in some cases, our understanding of the origins of life itself. In 2010, the Japanese Hayabusa spacecraft returned to Earth carrying samples from a near-Earth asteroid called Itokawa, the first time a sample had been returned from an asteroid. The samples were tiny, essentially dust grains, but their analysis yielded the remarkable finding that some of the material in Itokawa had been processed by liquid water in the early solar system, suggesting that in the first few million years after the solar system's formation, even small asteroids experienced hydrothermal activity, with liquid water percolating through their interiors. This has enormous implications for astrobiology, because it means that the early solar system was far more water-rich and chemically active than we had thought, and that complex organic chemistry, possibly including prebiotic molecules relevant to the origin of life, could have been occurring throughout the asteroid belt from very early times. The successor mission, Hayabusa 2, visited asteroid Ryugu and returned samples in 2020. The analysis of those samples, published in a series of papers beginning in 2022, has been nothing short of extraordinary. The Ryugu samples contain a vast array of organic molecules, including amino acids, the building blocks of proteins, nucleobases, the building blocks of DNA and RNA, and even liquid water trapped in tiny crystals, billions of years old. These molecules were not contamination from Earth. They had signatures of extraterrestrial origin. They included amino acids that are found in life on Earth, like glycine, as well as amino acids not commonly found in biological systems. The finding confirmed what many scientists had long suspected but never been able to demonstrate so directly: that the ingredients of life are delivered from space. That comets and asteroids carry the molecular precursors of life throughout the solar system, potentially seeding every world they strike with the raw materials from which life might assemble itself. This is both hopeful and humbling. Hopeful because it suggests that the building blocks of life are abundant and widespread. Humbling because it means the origin of life was not a once-in-a-universe miracle. It was, perhaps, the inevitable result of chemistry that began in interstellar space and was completed on wet, warm planetary surfaces. NASA's OSIRIS-RX mission, recently renamed OSIRIS-APEX after completing its primary mission, visited the asteroid Bennu, a near-Earth asteroid about 500 meters in diameter that orbits the Sun on a path that brings it close to Earth every 6 years. The mission returned a sample in September 2023, delivering capsule of Bennu material to the Utah desert, the largest asteroid sample ever returned to Earth. Initial analysis revealed that Bennu's material is rich in hydrated clay minerals and organic compounds, and includes material that was never significantly heated, preserving pristine records of the solar system's earliest chemistry from 4.5 billion years ago. Scientists are still analyzing the Bennu samples, and the results emerging are consistently surprising. The composition suggests that Bennu's parent body, a much larger asteroid that was shattered by a collision, with Bennu being one of the surviving fragments, contained material that formed in a liquid water environment. Another small world with an ancient, watery past. But there is something else about Bennu that, while not directly related to the origin of life, is deeply relevant to another kind of existential concern. Bennu has a small but non-negligible probability of striking Earth in the late 22nd century. Specifically, on September 24, 2182, there is a probability of roughly 1 in 2,700, about 0.037%, that Bennu will hit Earth. This makes Bennu the most significant impact threat to Earth currently known over the next 2 centuries. A collision with Bennu would release energy equivalent to approximately 22 times the most powerful nuclear weapon ever detonated. It would not be civilization-ending, but it would be catastrophic, depending on where it struck. The OSIRIS-RX mission was, in part, motivated by the desire to better characterize Bennu's orbit and understand the forces acting on it, including a subtle but real force called the Yarkovsky effect, in which uneven heating and radiation of a small asteroid surface creates a tiny thrust that, over years and decades, measurably alters its orbit. By understanding the Yarkovsky effect on Bennu, Scientists can more precisely predict whether the 2182 close approach will result in a collision. And in the longer term, the knowledge gained from missions like OSIRIS-RX will be essential if we ever need to deflect an asteroid, something that NASA has already begun testing with its DART mission, which in September 2022 deliberately crashed a spacecraft into a small asteroid called Dimorphos and successfully shortened its orbital period by 33 minutes, proving that kinetic impactors can alter asteroid orbits. Think about that for a moment. In 2022, for the first time in human history, we deliberately changed the orbit of a celestial body. We moved a world. Small, yes, a boulder-covered lump about 160 meters across. But we moved it. We demonstrated, in the most practical and definitive possible way, that we have the knowledge and the technology to protect our planet from an impact that would have, in any previous era of human history, been absolutely unavoidable. This is one of those achievements that, in the grand sweep of history, will be recognized as a milestone of the first order. The moment humanity stopped being entirely at the mercy of the cosmos and began, in the smallest but most meaningful way, to push back. Now let us talk about something that most people have heard of but very few people truly appreciate in its full strangeness: the rings of Saturn. Because the rings of Saturn are not simply beautiful, they are bizarre. And the more we study them, the more bizarre they become. From a distance, Saturn's rings look like a solid, flat disk, a perfect, smooth halo around the planet, stretching out for hundreds of thousands of kilometers. But they are not solid. They are made of billions and billions of individual particles, ranging in size from tiny dust grains to chunks of ice the size of houses, each one orbiting Saturn independently, like a tiny moon. The rings are composed primarily of water ice, with some rocky material, and they are extraordinarily flat. Despite extending roughly 282,000 kilometers from edge to edge, they are only about 10 to hundreds of meters thick in most places. If you scaled the rings to the size of a sheet of paper, the paper would be a kilometer wide. But here is the truly shocking thing about Saturn's rings, the thing that has appended models of ring formation and continues to puzzle researchers. The rings are young. Not young in human terms. Young in solar system terms. They formed, according to current estimates, somewhere between 10 million and 100 million years ago. This was when dinosaurs walked the Earth. In cosmic terms, the rings appeared practically yesterday. Before that, Saturn, like Jupiter, Uranus, and Neptune, almost certainly had no significant ring system, or a much smaller, different one. This raises an immediate question. What created the rings? The leading hypothesis is that a large moon, or possibly a comet or asteroid, was gravitationally disrupted by Saturn, torn apart by tidal forces, and the debris spread into a ring system. Some models suggest it was a moon as large as Mimas, one of Saturn's existing moons, itself about 400 kilometers in diameter. A recent proposal suggests that a hypothetical moon, nicknamed Chrysalis, was pulled into a destabilized orbit by Saturn's gravitational interactions and eventually came too close, was tidally disrupted, and its fragments became the rings we see today. While at the same time, Chrysalis's disruption caused Saturn's current axial tilt, which is itself a somewhat unusual 26.7 degrees. This model, published by researchers from MIT in 2022 in the journal Science, elegantly explains two mysteries at once: the youth of the rings and Saturn's axial tilt. But the rings are also disappearing. Slowly, inexorably, they are raining down onto Saturn. Charged ice particles in the rings are pulled along magnetic field lines and fall into Saturn's atmosphere in a process called ring rain. NASA's Cassini spacecraft measured this ring rain and found that it is losing material at a rate that would drain the entire ring system in a period of 100 to 300 million years. Saturn's rings are therefore a temporary feature of our solar system, one that we happen to be living in the right era to observe. In the very long run, Saturn will lose its rings. It will become, like Jupiter and Neptune, a ringed planet in memory only. There is something poignant about this, something that makes Saturn's rings, which seem so permanent and so defining, feel suddenly fragile and precious. They are, in the solar system's long history, a brief flash of beauty. and we are lucky enough to exist at the moment when they are at their most spectacular. Let us now turn to a topic that is genuinely difficult to fully process, because it deals not with a single world or a single discovery, but with the overall architecture of our solar system, and with the question of whether that architecture is normal. Because the more we have learned about other solar systems over the past 30 years, through the astonishing catalog of exoplanets discovered by missions like Kepler and TESS, the more our own solar system seems to be an outlier. A strange, perhaps unique configuration that does not follow the patterns we observe in most other planetary systems. The Kepler Space Telescope, which operated from 2009 to 2018, discovered more than 2,600 confirmed exoplanets, worlds orbiting other stars. The planet type it found most commonly, by far, was super-Earths and mini-Neptunes, planets with radii between 1.25 and 4 times Earth's radius, orbiting their stars at relatively close distances, often with orbital periods of less than 100 days. Our solar system has none of these. 0. Mercury, our innermost planet, orbits the Sun at a distance of about 0.39 astronomical units. In many other star systems, there are multiple large planets orbiting within 0.3 or 0.4 astronomical units, sometimes even within 0.1 astronomical units. Our solar system's inner region is almost conspicuously empty compared to what we see elsewhere. Why? The Great Tack Hypothesis, as we discussed, provides one possible answer: that Jupiter's migration swept the inner solar system clean of the material that would have formed super-Earths. But another possibility is that our solar system is simply unusual. Perhaps the specific conditions that produced our particular configuration, a solar system with 4 small rocky inner planets, a gap with an asteroid belt, and 4 giant outer planets, without any super-Earths or hot Jupiters, are rare, the product of a series of fortunate, from our perspective, circumstances that most planetary systems do not share. This matters profoundly for the question of life. If Earth-like planets, small, rocky, with liquid water, in the habitable zone of a sun-like star, are common in the universe, then Earth-like life might be common too. But if planets like Earth require the very specific conditions that shaped our solar system, including the particular migration history of Jupiter, the late heavy bombardment, the formation of the Moon, the specific geometry of Saturn's influence, then truly Earth-like planets might be rare. Astronomer Peter Ward and paleontologist Joe Kirschvink, in their book Rare Earth, argued that complex, multicellular life might be extraordinarily uncommon in the universe precisely because the conditions required to produce it are so specific, so contingent on so many particular events, that they are unlikely to arise elsewhere. This is a minority view among astrobiologists, but it is a serious one, and it is grounded in a deep reading of our solar system's unusual character. Consider this: our Sun is a G-type star, a yellow dwarf, relatively large, relatively stable, with a lifespan long enough to allow complex life to evolve. Most stars in the galaxy are M-type red dwarfs, smaller, dimmer, and prone to intense solar flares that could strip away a planet's atmosphere or irradiate its surface with lethal radiation. A planet in the habitable zone of a red dwarf would be so close to the star that it would likely be tidally locked, with one side in permanent day and the other in permanent night. Whether life could arise in such conditions is unknown. Our Sun, in comparison, is almost perfectly suited for the task of supporting a planet like Earth. Is this coincidence? Is it design? Is it selection bias? The unavoidable fact that we can only exist on a planet capable of supporting us, and therefore we should not be surprised to find ourselves on such a planet? This last explanation, known as the anthropic principle, is philosophically profound but scientifically unsatisfying, because it tells us where we had to have come from without telling us how common or rare our situation truly is. Now I want to spend some time on something that represents, I think, the single most existentially significant discovery ever made about our solar system. Not a planet, not a moon, not an asteroid. A concept, a number, and a question it raises that humans have been unable to answer for over 60 years. In 1950, the physicist Enrico Fermi, one of the architects of the nuclear age, a man of extraordinary scientific intuition, is reported to have asked, during a lunch conversation with colleagues at Los Alamos, a simple question. Where's everybody? He was talking about extraterrestrial civilizations. He pointed out that given the age and size of the galaxy, even if interstellar travel is difficult and slow, civilizations far older than ours should have had time to colonize the entire galaxy many times over. They should be here. We should see signs of them. We should have heard from them. And yet we have not. The sky is silent. The universe, despite its incomprehensible size and age, seems empty of any signal that announces the presence of intelligence beyond our own. This paradox, the contradiction between the high probability of extraterrestrial intelligence and the complete absence of any evidence for it, has become known as the Fermi paradox. Many explanations have been proposed. Perhaps intelligent life is extraordinarily rare, the rare Earth hypothesis applied to intelligence rather than just complex life. Perhaps intelligent civilizations inevitably destroy themselves before developing interstellar capability. The dark possibility that the development of technology that can destroy a civilization always outpaces the wisdom needed to prevent that destruction. Perhaps there are physical or economic barriers to interstellar travel that make colonization impossible even for advanced civilizations. Perhaps intelligent life is common but quiet, choosing not to broadcast its presence for reasons we cannot currently imagine. Perhaps we are simply not looking in the right way, with the right instruments, at the right frequencies. And there is one more explanation, the one that most people find the most disturbing, though it is the one that has the most serious engagement from some of the best physicists and astronomers in the world. It is called the Great Filter. The idea was first articulated by economist Robin Hanson in 1998. The Great Filter is a step in the development of life and civilization that is extraordinarily difficult to pass through. A filter that, for most civilizations, represents an insurmountable obstacle. The question is where this filter lies. Is it behind us or ahead of us? If the Great Filter is behind us, if the hardest step was in our own past, perhaps the emergence of the first self-replicating molecule, or the development of the eukaryotic cell, or the emergence of multicellular life, or some combination of these events, then we may have been extraordinarily lucky, and while the universe is probably largely barren of complex life, our future is open. We have passed the filter. We can, in principle, colonize the galaxy. But if the Great Filter is ahead of us, if there is some step between our current level of civilization and an interstellar-capable civilization that virtually no species has ever successfully navigated, then the silence of the universe becomes a warning, a premonition. And every new discovery we make that increases the likelihood of simple life in the universe, every amino acid found in an asteroid sample, every subsurface ocean discovered, every potentially habitable moon identified, makes the Great Filter ahead of us scenario more frightening. Because if simple life is common but complex civilizations are absent, something must be stopping them. And whatever is stopping them is, by definition, in our future. This is why, strange as it may seem, some scientists have expressed a kind of paradoxical dread at the prospect of discovering simple microbial life on Mars or Enceladus. Not because they do not want to find life, they desperately do, but because finding life would mean life is common, which means the Great Filter is not the origin of life, which means the filter must be somewhere else, and the somewhere else might be a step we have not yet reached. The silence of the universe, in this reading, is not a comfort. It is a clue. And the clue points towards something dark. Let us continue exploring the solar system's most unsettling corners, because we have barely scratched the surface. Uranus, the sideways planet. The ice giant that rotates on its side, with its axis tilted 98 degrees from vertical, meaning it essentially rolls through space on its side, with its poles pointing roughly toward the sun and away from the sun rather than its equator. One hemisphere of Uranus experiences 42 years of continuous sunlight during its 84-year orbit, followed by 42 years of continuous darkness. The extremity of this tilt is unlike anything else in the solar system, and explaining it has proven remarkably difficult. The most widely accepted explanation is that Uranus was struck by an Earth-sized body early in the solar system's history, a giant impact that knocked it onto its side. Some models suggest this may have been a single, catastrophic collision. Others suggest multiple smaller impacts. Neither explanation is fully satisfying, and the exact mechanism remains uncertain. But Uranus's strangeness goes beyond its tilt. It is the coldest planet in the solar system, despite being closer to the Sun than Neptune. This is deeply puzzling, because Neptune, which is farther from the Sun, radiates significantly more heat into space than it receives from the Sun, meaning Neptune has an internal heat source, likely residual heat from its formation or ongoing internal convection. Uranus, however, radiates almost exactly the same amount of heat as it receives, meaning it appears to have no significant internal heat source, or that its internal heat is somehow trapped and not reaching the surface. Why Uranus and Neptune, two very similar ice giants, should behave so differently is one of the enduring mysteries of planetary science. Some researchers have proposed that the same giant impact that tilted Uranus also disrupted its internal structure in a way that suppresses heat flow. Others have proposed a layer of high-density material deep in Uranus's interior that acts as a thermal barrier. As of now, we do not have a satisfying answer. We have also visited Uranus only once, the Voyager 2 flyby in January 1986, during which the spacecraft had only a few hours at close range to study the planet. The images returned showed a featureless, pale blue-green disk, a world that, compared to the spectacular banded storms of Jupiter and the majestic hexagonal storm at Saturn's North Pole, seems strangely bland. But that blandness is itself mysterious. Uranus is suspected to have enormous diamond rain in its interior. Pressure so intense that carbon compounds crystallize into diamond, falling through layers of exotic matter toward the planet's core. This is not science fiction. Laboratory experiments recreating the extreme pressures of planetary interiors have demonstrated that diamond can form and precipitate under these conditions, and Uranus and Neptune are considered the most likely places in our solar system where it actually happens. There is a mission concept under development for a Uranus orbiter and probe, ranked as the highest priority flagship mission for the 2023 to 2032 decade by the Planetary Science Decadal Survey, the community report that guides NASA's priorities. If funded and launched, it would arrive at Uranus in the late 2040s and spend several years studying the planet and its moons in detail for the first time since Voyager. The expectation among planetary scientists is that this mission will be as transformative as Cassini was for Saturn, that it will reveal a world of extraordinary complexity and strangeness that we have only dimly glimpsed. Neptune, too, deserves more attention than it often receives. At its North Pole, there is a storm called the Great Dark Spot, observed by Voyager 2 in 1989, which has since disappeared. Storms on Neptune apparently arise and dissipate on timescales of years. Neptune has winds that are the fastest of any planet in the solar system, reaching up to 2,100 kilometers per hour, faster than the speed of sound on Earth. And it has a moon, Triton, that is one of the most extraordinary objects in the solar system. Triton orbits Neptune in a retrograde direction, opposite to the direction Neptune rotates. Every other large moon in the solar system orbits its planet in the same direction the planet rotates, a consequence of forming from the same rotating disk of material as the planet. A retrograde orbit can only result from a captured object, one that originally formed elsewhere and was gravitationally captured by the planet. This means Triton is not a native moon of Neptune. It is a captured Kuiper belt object, a body similar to Pluto but one that was trapped in orbit around Neptune, likely billions of years ago. The capture would have been an event of extraordinary violence. The gravitational interactions involved would have disrupted any original moons Neptune might have had and dramatically altered the orbits of surviving moons. Triton's retrograde orbit is also slowly decaying. As it orbits Neptune, tidal forces gradually reduce its orbital energy, spiraling it inward. In approximately 3.6 billion years, Triton will come close enough to Neptune that it will be torn apart by tidal forces, creating a new ring system around Neptune, possibly as spectacular as Saturn's rings. An event we will, of course, never live to see. But Triton is remarkable in another way. It is geologically active. Voyager 2 photographed geysers on Triton's surface, not water geysers, but geysers of dark, nitrogen gas jets erupting through the icy crust, driven by heating of nitrogen ice by the faint sunlight that reaches Triton's surface. These geysers send dark plumes kilometers into the thin nitrogen atmosphere. It is one of the most dramatic sights any Voyager image revealed. A world at the very edge of the solar system, so cold that nitrogen is solid on its surface, nevertheless active, nevertheless alive in its way, still erupting into the dark. Now I want to talk about something that scientists discovered about our solar system relatively recently, and that, when you sit with it, is genuinely unsettling in a quiet, philosophical way. I am talking about the discovery of interstellar objects passing through our solar system. In October 2017, astronomers at the Pan-STARRS telescope in Hawaii detected a small object moving through the inner solar system on a trajectory that was hyperbolic, an orbit that cannot be bound to the sun's gravity. The object was moving so fast, and at such an angle, that it could only have come from interstellar space, from outside our solar system entirely. This was the first unambiguous detection of an interstellar object passing through our solar system, and the implications were immediately stunning. The object was named Oumuamua, a Hawaiian word meaning a messenger from afar arriving first, or scout. As astronomers scrambled to study it before it left the inner solar system too quickly to observe in detail, the observations revealed something deeply puzzling. Oumuamua was elongated. Models suggested an aspect ratio of roughly 6:1, meaning it was about 6 times longer than it was wide, more like a cigar or a pancake than any comet or asteroid we have ever observed. It was not outgassing like a comet. No coma, no tail was detected. And most perplexingly, as it traveled through the solar system, it was accelerating. Not from gravity. The gravitational acceleration from the Sun was accounted for in its trajectory. It was accelerating in excess of gravity, deviating from the path a purely gravitational trajectory would dictate. On Earth, comets show exactly this kind of non-gravitational acceleration. It is caused by outgassing, by material vaporizing off the comet surface and providing a tiny thrust. But Oumuamua showed no outgassing that could be detected. How was it accelerating? Various explanations were proposed. Perhaps it was composed of hydrogen ice, which would evaporate without visible signs at the wavelengths we were observing. Perhaps it had an unusual shape that interacted with sunlight in an unusual way, pushed along by radiation pressure. This would only work if Oumuamua were extraordinarily thin, like a sheet, rather than chunky. Perhaps it was something else entirely. And then Avi Loeb, the chair of the astronomy department at Harvard University at the time, published a paper in 2018 co-authored with his postdoctoral researcher Shmuel Bialy, suggesting an extraordinary possibility. That Oumuamua's anomalous acceleration could be explained if it were a thin, light-reflecting sheet pushed by solar radiation, in other words, a solar sail. And if it were a solar sail, it might be an artifact of an extraterrestrial technological civilization. A piece of alien technology passing through our solar system. This suggestion was met with a spectrum of responses ranging from thoughtful engagement to outright dismissal. Most astronomers were deeply skeptical, arguing that the natural explanations, while imperfect, were far more parsimonious than invoking extraterrestrial technology. But Loeb defended his position vigorously, arguing that the scientific community's reflexive dismissal of the idea was itself unscientific, that the extraordinary nature of the object warranted extraordinary consideration of all possibilities, including technological ones. He expanded his argument into a book, Extraterrestrial, published in 2021. The debate over Oumuamua has never been fully resolved, because by the time we understood how strange it was already leaving the solar system, and there was nothing more we could do to study it. We watched something extraordinary pass through our cosmic neighborhood, and we do not know, perhaps we'll never know, what it was. In 2019, a second interstellar object was detected, Comet 2I/Borisov. Unlike Oumuamua, Borisov was immediately recognizable as a comet. It had a visible coma, was outgassing, and had a composition broadly similar to solar system comets. It behaved, in other words, exactly as a chunk of rock and ice from another solar system would be expected to behave. Its discovery was reassuring in one sense. It confirmed that Oumuamua was not the only interstellar visitor we would ever see. but it also threw Oumuamua's strangeness into sharper relief. Why was Oumuamua so different from Borisov? Was it simply a different type of material? Perhaps a shard of nitrogen ice, as some researchers proposed, broken off from a Pluto-like world in another solar system? Or was it something we have no framework for? Astronomers are now preparing to search for future interstellar visitors with new all-sky surveys, particularly the Vera Rubin Observatory in Chile, which will scan the entire sky continuously with unprecedented sensitivity and will, theoretically, detect interstellar objects much earlier in their approach, giving us time to study them in detail, or even, in future decades, to intercept them with fast spacecraft. The idea of launching a mission to intercept an interstellar object in real time, essentially chasing down a visitor from another star system while it crosses through our solar system, has been seriously discussed among planetary scientists and mission designers. The technical challenges are immense, but not impossible. Now, let us turn our attention to the Sun itself, because the star at the center of our solar system is, upon close examination, one of the most strange and powerful objects we can conceivably study, and it produces phenomena that, even though we have studied them for decades, still resist full explanation. One of the most long-standing mysteries in solar physics is the coronal heating problem. The Sun's surface, the photosphere, has a temperature of about 5,500 degrees Celsius. As you move outward from the surface into the Sun's outer atmosphere, the corona, you would expect the temperature to decrease, as it does when you move away from any heat source. Instead, the opposite happens. The temperature in the corona rises dramatically, reaching temperatures of 1 to 3 million degrees Celsius, and in some active regions, tens of millions of degrees. The corona is hundreds of times hotter than the surface below it. This is wildly counterintuitive, and for decades it was one of the most puzzling unsolved problems in astrophysics. Several mechanisms have been proposed. One involves wave heating, specifically Alfvén waves, electromagnetic waves that travel along magnetic field lines in the Sun's plasma. These waves carry energy from the Sun's interior to the corona, where they dissipate and heat the plasma. Another mechanism involves magnetic reconnection, events where oppositely directed magnetic field lines break and reconnect, releasing enormous amounts of energy in what are called nanoflares. NASA's Parker Solar Probe, which has been making increasingly close approaches to the Sun since its launch in 2018, flying closer to the Sun than any previous spacecraft, has been measuring the Sun's corona and has returned data strongly suggesting that both Alfvén wave heating and small-scale magnetic reconnection events play important roles. In 2021, the Parker Solar Probe became the first spacecraft to enter the solar corona itself, flying through the outermost layer of the Sun's atmosphere, sampling the plasma and magnetic fields directly for the first time. The findings have been extraordinary, revealing a complex, dynamic, turbulent environment full of unexpected structures, including sharp magnetic field reversals that scientists have called switchbacks, sudden reversals in the direction of the magnetic field that have been puzzling researchers since they were first detected by earlier missions. And the Sun has a deeper mystery, one that is not often discussed in popular accounts because it is uncomfortable in its implications. In the 1960s, physicists began calculating the number of neutrinos, subatomic particles produced in enormous quantities by the nuclear fusion reactions at the Sun's core that should be reaching Earth. The calculations predicted a certain flux of solar neutrinos. And then experiments began measuring those neutrinos, and the measurements consistently found only about 1/3 as many neutrinos as the theory predicted. For decades, this discrepancy, the solar neutrino problem, was deeply troubling. Was something wrong with our model of the Sun? Was something wrong with our understanding of nuclear physics? Were the neutrinos disappearing somewhere between the Sun and Earth? The resolution, which took decades to achieve, was one of the most profound discoveries in all of particle physics. Neutrinos have mass, and they oscillate. They change between different types, or flavors, as they travel. The solar neutrinos predicted by the Standard Model were all electron neutrinos, but by the time they reached Earth, many of them had oscillated into muon neutrinos or tau neutrinos, which the early detectors could not detect. When detectors capable of detecting all three types were built, particularly the Sudbury Neutrino Observatory in Canada. The total flux matched the predictions perfectly. The solar neutrino problem was solved, but in the process, it revealed that neutrinos, once thought to be massless, actually have mass, a discovery that requires modifications to the standard model of particle physics. The Sun is also capable of producing events that, should they occur with sufficient intensity toward Earth, could have catastrophic consequences for our technological civilization. Solar flares, intense bursts of radiation from the Sun's surface, and coronal mass ejections, massive expulsions of magnetized plasma from the corona, are routine features of solar activity. Most are relatively minor, producing beautiful auroral displays but no significant harm. But occasionally, the Sun produces events of exceptional power. The Carrington event of 1859, named after the British astronomer Richard Carrington, who observed and recorded it, was the largest solar storm in recorded history. A powerful solar flare was followed by a coronal mass ejection so energetic that when the magnetized plasma struck Earth's magnetic field, it induced enormous electrical currents in telegraph wires across the world. Telegraph operators received electric shocks. Some telegraph machines caught fire. Auroras were visible at latitudes as far south as Cuba and Hawaii. The entire globe's electrical infrastructure, which, in 1859, consisted essentially of telegraph wires, was disrupted. Today, our technological civilization is orders of magnitude more dependent on electrical infrastructure. A Carrington-scale event today. And solar physicists are quite certain that such events occur on a timescale of roughly every 100 to 200 years, with smaller but still severe events more frequently, would be catastrophic. Transformers at electrical substations would be destroyed on a massive scale. Some of these transformers take years to manufacture and are not kept in stock. Power grids could be knocked out across entire continents, not for days but for months or years. Satellite communication would be severely disrupted. GPS systems would fail. The economic damage has been estimated in the trillions of dollars, with cascading effects on water supply, food distribution, healthcare, and essentially every aspect of modern life that depends on electricity. A study by researchers at the Zurich University of Applied Sciences, published in 2022, estimated that a Carrington-scale event today would cost the global economy between $0.5 and $11.5 trillion in its first year, with ongoing costs extending for years afterward. And here is the truly unsettling part. A storm even more powerful than the Carrington event has occurred within the recent past. In 2012, a massive solar eruption occurred, one that researchers, studying it after the fact, concluded would have been significantly more powerful than the Carrington event. And it missed Earth by approximately 9 days. 9 days. Earth had crossed that region of space 9 days before the eruption. If it had been 9 days later, we would have taken the full force of what many researchers consider the most powerful solar eruption in at least 150 years. Daniel Baker of the University of Colorado, who led the study of the 2012 event, described it bluntly. If the eruption had hit Earth, we would still be picking up the pieces. The near miss of 2012 is not widely known outside the solar physics community, but it is one of those facts that, once you know it, changes how you think about the precariousness of our technological civilization and about the power of the star we orbit. Now let us return to something I mentioned briefly earlier and explore it in the depth it deserves, the Oort cloud. Because the Oort cloud, the vast, hypothetical shell of icy bodies at the outer edge of our solar system, is one of the most extraordinary structures in the solar system that we have never directly observed, and it holds implications for understanding the solar system's past and future that are genuinely mind-bending. The Oort cloud, proposed by Dutch astronomer Jan Oort in 1950, is thought to extend from roughly 2,000 astronomical units out to perhaps 100,000 astronomical units from the Sun, approaching about 1/4 to half the distance to the nearest star. At its outer edge, the gravitational hold of the Sun on the objects within it is extraordinarily tenuous. Even the gravity of passing stars, or the tidal pull of the Milky Way galaxy itself, can perturb objects at that distance, sending them on new trajectories, either deeper into the cloud or, dramatically, inward toward the inner solar system as long-period comets. The Oort cloud is thought to contain trillions of icy bodies, comets, dwarf planets, all manner of frozen debris, representing the primordial material of the outer solar system that was never incorporated into planets. Some of these objects may be the most pristine material in the solar system. Unchanged since the days of the protoplanetary disk, billions of years of cold, dark, quiet preservation. They are, in a sense, time capsules from the very beginning. But the Oort cloud can be disturbed. If a star passes close enough to the Sun, which happens occasionally on astronomical timescales, it can send a wave of comets cascading inward, producing what some researchers have called a comet shower. These showers would dramatically increase the rate of cometary impacts on the inner solar system for millions of years. Some researchers have proposed that previous mass extinctions in Earth's history, including the Permo-Triassic extinction about 252 million years ago, the largest mass extinction in Earth's history, which wiped out perhaps 96% of all marine species, might have been triggered or contributed to by such a comet shower, though this remains highly speculative and is not the consensus view of the relevant extinction events. What is not speculative is that the Oort cloud represents a reservoir of potential impactors that the Sun's neighborhood gravitational environment can mobilize at essentially any time. We cannot predict when the next star will pass close enough to disturb the Oort cloud. We cannot observe the vast majority of Oort cloud objects, and we would have very little warning, potentially centuries, but possibly less, if a large comet from the Oort cloud were sent on a trajectory toward Earth. Unlike near-Earth asteroids, which are now extensively catalogued and tracked, long-period comets from the Oort cloud can arrive unexpectedly, with orbital periods of thousands or millions of years, appearing for the first time in recorded history and giving us a brief window, sometimes only months, to observe them before they either pass through the inner solar system and return to the deep outer solar system, or, in rare cases, approach close to Earth. The comet that played a role in one of the most famous events in solar system history came not from the Oort cloud but from the Kuiper belt, Comet Shoemaker-Levy 9. This comet, discovered in 1993, was already in pieces. It had been captured by Jupiter's gravity, orbited the planet, and on a close pass in 1992 had been torn into about 21 fragments by Jupiter's tidal forces, creating a train of icy chunks spread across a vast distance. In July 1994, those fragments struck Jupiter one after another, in one of the most spectacular and well-documented impact events in history. Astronomers around the world pointed their telescopes at Jupiter. The Hubble Space Telescope was given continuous observing time. Every fragment that struck Jupiter produced an explosion visible from Earth. Dark impact scars that persisted in Jupiter's cloud bands for months, some of them larger than the entire Earth. The impacts released energies equivalent to hundreds of billions of nuclear weapons. They were nothing compared to the impact that killed the dinosaurs. That event released roughly 10,000 times more energy than all of Shoemaker-Levy 9's fragments combined. And yet Shoemaker-Levy 9's impacts were visible from Earth with small telescopes, were detectable across the solar system, and left marks on Jupiter for almost a year. The Shoemaker-Levy 9 impacts were not just a spectacle. They were a reminder. They were the solar system saying, in the clearest possible terms, this happens. This is not ancient history or science fiction or a remote possibility. This is the solar system doing what it has always done, building things up and tearing them down, crashing worlds into each other, redistributing matter and energy in events of unimaginable scale. And any world in the inner solar system, including ours, is not exempt from this process. We are protected by distance and by the gravitational influence of the giant planets and by the relative stability of our current orbital configuration, and also by pure luck. For the last 66 million years, since the impact that ended the Cretaceous and opened the way for mammals and eventually humans, no mass extinction scale impact has struck Earth. This period of relative safety is, in geological terms, not guaranteed to continue indefinitely. Now let us explore one of the most extraordinary and puzzling features ever discovered in the history of planetary science. Something that was hiding in plain sight, orbiting Saturn, until a spacecraft happened to fly close enough to notice. The hexagonal storm at Saturn's North Pole. In 1988, Reviewing images returned by the two Voyager spacecraft during their flybys of Saturn in 1980 and 1981, scientists noticed something at Saturn's North Pole that they initially could barely believe. There was a storm there, not an unusual thing for a gas giant. But this storm was shaped like a hexagon. A geometric hexagon, with 6 nearly equal sides, each approximately 14,500 kilometers long, roughly the diameter of Earth. The hexagon rotates, completing one rotation in almost exactly 10 hours and 39 minutes, which corresponds to Saturn's internal rotation rate. It has persisted for the entire period during which we have observed it, nearly 4 decades, essentially unchanged in its shape and position. Why is it hexagonal? Why not circular, like most planetary storm systems? The explanation, worked out by laboratory experiments and computer simulations, involves fluid dynamics. Specifically, the interaction between a central jet stream and the surrounding atmosphere. When you spin a fluid in a container and create specific patterns of differential rotation, regions spinning at different speeds, you can generate polygonal patterns rather than circular ones. Experiments in rotating tanks of water have reproduced hexagonal patterns very similar to Saturn's, demonstrating that the hexagon is a consequence of fluid dynamics rather than a mysteriously special atmospheric chemistry. The specific shape depends on the rate of the central jet and the wavelength of the perturbation. Conditions at Saturn's North Pole produce a 6-sided polygon. Nevertheless, knowing the mechanism does not entirely diminish the strangeness of seeing it. This hexagonal storm system is almost obscenely geometric, almost suspiciously regular. Exactly the kind of structure that, if you found it on Earth and did not know meteorology, you might take as evidence of design. The Cassini spacecraft, when it arrived at Saturn in 2004 and spent years orbiting the planet, photographed the North Polar hexagon in extraordinary detail, capturing its swirling cloud patterns, its geometric precision, and the immense hurricane at its center. An eye-wall hurricane even larger than the hexagon it sits within, with winds exceeding 500 kilometers per hour. It is one of the most breathtaking images ever returned from the outer solar system. And there is this. At Saturn's South Pole, there is a completely different structure. A massive hurricane without the hexagonal boundary. The difference between the two poles underlines how sensitive planetary atmospheric dynamics are to initial conditions, and how the same planet can produce radically different structures in different locations. Let us now talk about Pluto. Beloved, demoted Pluto, which has generated more public emotional response than perhaps any other scientific reclassification in history. Because when the New Horizons spacecraft flew past Pluto in July 2015, the first and, to date, only close encounter with that distant world, what it revealed was so surprising, so rich, so far beyond anything scientists had expected, that the team members who had spent decades building and flying the mission found themselves struggling to process what they were seeing in real time. From a distance, Pluto had been expected to be a simple, cold, geologically inert body, a chunk of ice and rock in the outer solar system, scarred by ancient craters, dark and unremarkable. What New Horizons revealed instead was a world of extraordinary geological complexity. A world with towering mountains of water ice, rising 3.5 kilometers above the surface. A world with vast nitrogen ice plains. A region so large and so smooth and so strikingly heart-shaped that scientists immediately nicknamed it Tombaugh Regio, in honor of Clyde Tombaugh, who discovered Pluto in 1930, and the public immediately took to calling it simply the Heart. A world with a thin but complex atmosphere of nitrogen, methane, and carbon monoxide that extends hundreds of kilometers above the surface and produces hazes that catch the light of the distant sun in photographs of haunting beauty. A world, and this is perhaps the most extraordinary discovery, that appears to be geologically active. The nitrogen ice plains of Sputnik Planitia, the western lobe of the Heart, show a pattern of polygonal cells, roughly 20 to 40 kilometers across, separated by ridges, a pattern that can be explained by convection. The nitrogen ice, warmed slightly by heat from Pluto's interior, slowly overturns, like the lava in a lava lamp, with warm material rising at the centers of the polygonal cells and cool material sinking along the boundaries. This means that the surface of Sputnik Planitia is constantly, slowly, renewing itself. the oldest surface features being overturned and replaced in a timescale of perhaps hundreds of thousands of years. In planetary terms, this is essentially brand new. The surface of Sputnik Planitia may be geologically among the youngest surfaces in the solar system. But what is the heat source? Pluto is small. It has no giant planet nearby to provide tidal heating. Residual heat from formation would have dissipated long ago. Some researchers have proposed that radioactive decay of elements in Pluto's rocky core provides enough heat to drive the convection. This is plausible, and it has profound implications. If radioactive heating is sufficient to keep Pluto geologically active, then other Kuiper belt objects of similar size, and there are dozens of them, might also be geologically active. The outer solar system might be far more dynamic than we had imagined. Some researchers have even proposed that Pluto might harbor a subsurface ocean of liquid water, similar to those suspected beneath Europa, Enceladus, and Titan. The evidence is circumstantial but intriguing. Certain surface features of Pluto are consistent with a process in which a subsurface ocean has refrozen over time, producing expansion of the ice shell and extensional fractures at the surface. If Pluto has a subsurface ocean, and I want to emphasize this remains a hypothesis, not an established fact, then the number of potentially habitable environments in the outer solar system expands dramatically once again. The New Horizons mission also revealed Pluto's moons in unprecedented detail. Charon, Pluto's largest moon, so large relative to Pluto that the two form, in some sense, a binary system, orbiting their common center of mass, turned out to have its own extraordinary features. A vast canyon system stretching across much of its surface, larger than the Grand Canyon. A mysterious dark red region at its north pole called Mordor Macula, thought to be composed of tholins. Complex organic molecules formed when methane from Pluto's atmosphere drifts over to Charon, freezes out at the pole, and is then modified by ultraviolet radiation. Mordor Macula is, in essence, a chemical factory powered by solar ultraviolet light, manufacturing complex organic molecules on the surface of a frozen moon at the edge of the solar system. The smaller moons of Pluto, Nix, Hydra, Kerberos, and Styx, were found to rotate chaotically, tumbling unpredictably through space in a way that their orbital mechanics cannot stabilize. Astronomers had predicted this would be the case based on the complex gravitational environment they inhabit, and New Horizons confirmed it. They rotate in no fixed direction, tumbling and wobbling as they orbit, a natural consequence of living in the gravitational territory of two large nearby bodies. I want to pause here and ask you something. We have visited, in this journey through our solar system's most unsettling discoveries, oceans under ice, rain of diamonds, hexagonal storms, sideways planets, wandering giants, ancient impacts, potential life, missing planets, interstellar visitors, and cosmic near-misses. And we have only touched the surface. We have only begun to describe the strangeness. So here's the question I want you to sit with. Given everything you now know about the solar system, given all its violence, its complexity, its near-misses and its catastrophes and its hidden oceans and its unexpected chemistry, how do you feel about the idea that we understand it? That we have a handle on what it is and how it works? Because the more we explore it, the more the solar system seems not to be revealing itself, but to be deepening its mystery. Every answer generates more questions. Every discovery reveals more complexity. The territory of our ignorance grows faster than the territory of our knowledge. This is actually one of the most exciting things about the current era of planetary science. We are in a golden age of exploration. More missions are active in the solar system right now than at any previous time in history. The James Webb Space Telescope, launched in December 2021, is studying not only distant galaxies and stars but also solar system objects, returning data on the atmospheres of giant planets, the composition of comet tails, and the surface properties of Kuiper belt objects with a sensitivity that previous observatories could not match. The Juno spacecraft is orbiting Jupiter and has returned extraordinary data about the giant planet's interior, revealing that Jupiter's zones and belts extend thousands of kilometers below the visible surface, and that the planet's core is not a solid, compact object but a diffuse, fuzzy region where heavy elements are mixed with the gaseous envelope in a way no existing model fully predicted. Juno also discovered that Jupiter's poles are covered in a constant swarm of immense cyclones. At the North Pole, there is one central cyclone surrounded by 8 cyclones arranged in a regular pattern, and at the South Pole, one central cyclone surrounded by 5 others. These polar cyclone systems have persisted throughout Juno's observations, maintaining their positions and structures in a way that is not yet understood. They do not merge, as similar vortices on Earth would, but maintain stable spacing as if they are in some form of equilibrium that we do not yet have the physics to fully describe. The European Space Agency's JUICE mission, Jupiter Icy Moons Explorer, launched in April 2023 and is currently on its way to Jupiter, expected to arrive in 2031 and spend 3.5 years studying the Jovian system before going into orbit around Ganymede. JUICE will study Europa, Callisto, and Ganymede in detail, searching for evidence of their subsurface oceans and characterizing their habitability. In parallel, NASA's Europa Clipper mission launched in October 2024 and is heading to perform dozens of close flybys of Europa, specifically designed to study that moon's ocean, its ice shell, its chemistry, and its potential to support life. Between JUICE and Europa Clipper, the 2030s will be a decade of extraordinary discovery in the Jovian system. And there are missions being planned for Enceladus. Proposals for a dedicated spacecraft that would fly through the plume and directly sample its chemistry, or even land on the surface and drill down toward the ocean below. Such a mission, if approved and executed, could answer the question of whether Enceladus has life within the next 2 decades. That sentence should be read slowly, because its full weight deserves to be appreciated. Within the next 2 decades, we may know whether life exists in the ocean of a distant moon of Saturn. The age in which we find the answer to one of humanity's oldest questions may be closer than we realize. Let us turn to one of the most recently discovered and profoundly puzzling features of our solar system. One that involves not planets or moons, but the structure of the asteroid population itself, and what it reveals about the violent history of the inner solar system. In 2018, planetary scientists analyzing the orbital characteristics of near-Earth asteroids made a surprising discovery. A significant number of them appear to have originated from a single asteroid family, the result of a massive collision in the main asteroid belt that occurred between 100–400 million years ago. This asteroid family, known as the Veritas family, produced an enormous number of fragments, many of which were eventually perturbed by Jupiter's gravity into Earth-crossing orbits. The timing of this collision overlaps with the late Ordovician mass extinction about 445 million years ago, the second largest mass extinction in Earth's history, which wiped out about 85% of marine species. This extinction had previously been attributed to climate change associated with glaciation, and the asteroid impact hypothesis for this extinction is not the mainstream view. But the correlation that a major asteroid breakup event occurred in roughly the right time frame to produce elevated bombardment of Earth around the time of one of history's great extinctions is provocative, and it is actively studied. Similarly, a 2019 study published in Science Advances found that the rate of large asteroid impacts on Earth actually increased about 290 million years ago, consistent with the breakup of asteroid families in the main belt. The Moon, which preserves its impact history, shows a notable increase in large craters dating to this same period, suggesting that the entire inner solar system experienced elevated bombardments starting about 290 million years ago. This finding, based on new crater age dating using the thermal properties of lunar craters, challenged the previous assumption that the impact rate on Earth and the Moon has been roughly constant over the last billion years, and suggested instead that the impact rate fluctuates in response to events in the asteroid belt. These discoveries mean that the history of life on Earth, with its mass extinctions, its sudden turnovers of dominant species, its periodic catastrophes that wiped out the old and opened space for the new, is not only shaped by climate, volcanism, and evolution. It is shaped by the deep structure of the asteroid belt, by collisions between rocks in space hundreds of millions of kilometers away, by the gravitational dance of Jupiter and the orbital dynamics of debris fields that formed billions of years ago. Life on Earth is the product not just of chemistry and biology but of celestial mechanics. We are, in a very real sense, the survivors of a cosmic billiards game that has been playing out for 4.5 billion years, and the game is not over. Let us now explore something that has been a source of scientific fascination for decades, and that touches on one of the deepest questions about the nature of our solar system: the origin of Earth's water. Earth is a water world. Roughly 70% of its surface is covered in liquid water. The oceans contain approximately 1.335 billion cubic kilometers of water. Water is essential to every form of life we know. And yet the inner solar system, where Earth formed, should have been too hot and too close to the sun for significant amounts of water ice to survive during the period of planetary formation. The water that makes Earth habitable should not, by the simplest models, be here. So where did it come from? For decades, the leading hypothesis was that Earth's water was delivered by comets, icy bodies from the outer solar system that occasionally fall into the inner solar system and strike the inner planets. This makes intuitive sense. Comets are largely made of water ice, and they come from the outer solar system where water was abundant in the early protoplanetary disk. But this hypothesis ran into a significant problem when scientists measured the deuterium to hydrogen ratio of comet water. Deuterium is a heavy isotope of hydrogen, and the ratio of deuterium to ordinary hydrogen in water is a sensitive indicator of where and how the water formed. Earth's ocean water has a specific deuterium to hydrogen ratio. When researchers measured this ratio in several comets, including the famously studied Comet Halley and the comets Hale-Bopp and Hyakutake, they found that the ratio was approximately twice as high as in Earth's oceans. Comet water and Earth ocean water do not match. This suggested that comets, at least the Oort cloud comets we have been able to study, are not the primary source of Earth's water. Attention turned to asteroids, specifically the water-bearing carbonaceous chondrite meteorites, which are fragments of carbon-rich asteroids in the outer part of the main asteroid belt. These meteorites contain water locked in hydrated minerals, and their deuterium to hydrogen ratio matches Earth's oceans remarkably well. The current leading hypothesis is that most of Earth's water was delivered by asteroids, not as liquid water, but as water chemically bound in minerals, which was then released as the minerals were processed by geological activity on the young Earth. The analysis of asteroid samples from Ryugu, which I mentioned earlier, has added further support to this view. Ryugu is a carbonaceous asteroid, and its samples contain hydrated minerals and water with a deuterium to hydrogen ratio close to that of Earth's oceans. This is strong evidence that carbonaceous asteroids were a major source of Earth's water. But the story is more complex than a simple asteroid delivery. Some researchers argue that comets were not as unimportant as the early measurements suggested. The Rosetta mission to Comet 67P/Churyumov-Gerasimenko measured the deuterium to hydrogen ratio in that comet's water and found it to be 3 times higher than Earth's oceans, even higher than the earlier comet measurements. This increased the skepticism about comets as a water source. But other comets, particularly the Jupiter family comets that originate in the Kuiper belt rather than the Oort cloud, might have different ratios. Studies of Jupiter family comet 103P/Hartley 2 found a deuterium to hydrogen ratio much closer to Earth's oceans, raising the possibility that Kuiper belt comets, a different family from the Oort cloud comets, might have contributed significantly. The picture that is emerging is that Earth's water is probably a mixture of contributions from multiple sources: outer belt asteroids, perhaps some Jupiter family comets, and possibly even water that was present in the solar system dust from which Earth formed. And there is a deeper implication here. If asteroid and comet impacts delivered not only water to Earth, but also organic molecules, amino acids, nucleobases, sugars, the building blocks of biochemistry, then the origin of life on Earth may be intimately connected to the bombardment history of the early solar system. Life's ingredients may have arrived from space, which means that wherever in the universe you have a solar system with water-bearing asteroids and comets, you potentially have the ingredients for life being delivered to rocky worlds. And water-bearing asteroids appear to be common. We have found them around other stars in the form of water-rich debris falling into white dwarfs. The galaxy may be a much more life-friendly place than our intuitions, shaped by looking at the vast cold darkness between the stars, might suggest. Now let me take you somewhere extremely close to home, and extremely strange. I want to talk to you about the asteroid belt. the region between Mars and Jupiter, roughly from 2.2 to 3.2 astronomical units from the Sun, that contains millions of asteroids ranging in size from dust to the dwarf planet Ceres, which at about 940 kilometers in diameter is the largest object in the asteroid belt and contains roughly a third of the belt's total mass. For a long time, popular culture conceived of the asteroid belt as a dense, dangerous minefield of rocks, a barrier through which spacecraft would have to navigate carefully. The reality is almost the opposite. The asteroid belt is almost entirely empty space. If you added up all the material in the asteroid belt, it would form a body smaller than our moon. The typical distance between asteroids is hundreds of thousands of kilometers. Every spacecraft that has crossed the asteroid belt, and many have done so on their way to the outer solar system, has passed through without incident and in many cases without coming within millions of kilometers of any asteroid at all. The asteroid belt is, in practical terms, as empty as the rest of space. But why is it so empty? Why, in the zone between Mars and Jupiter, where a fifth planet might have formed, is there instead only this sparse scatter of rock and ice? We now know, from decades of modeling, that it is Jupiter's fault. The gravitational resonances created by Jupiter, regions in the asteroid belt where orbital periods are simple fractions of Jupiter's orbital period, create zones of gravitational instability that prevent material from accumulating. Objects in these resonances are repeatedly accelerated and decelerated until their orbits become eccentric enough to cross the orbits of Mars or Earth, where they are ultimately removed by collision or gravitational scattering. Jupiter's presence has effectively prevented a planet from forming in the asteroid belt. The belt is not the remnant of a planet that was destroyed, it is the remnant of a planet that never formed. The material that would have built another rocky world was scattered before it could coalesce, and what remains is the sparse, collision process debris we observe today. Ceres itself has turned out to be far more interesting than expected. The Dawn spacecraft, which arrived at Ceres in March 2015 after first orbiting the large asteroid Vesta, found a world dotted with mysterious bright spots in the floors of some craters, spots that NASA and the European Space Agency immediately recognized as something remarkable. The brightest spots, in a crater, turned out to be composed of sodium carbonate, a salt mineral, deposited by briny water seeping up from below, evaporating, and leaving salt residues behind. This implied that Ceres, like the outer solar system's icy moons, has liquid water in its interior, or at least water-bearing brines that remain liquid despite Ceres's small size and distance from the Sun. The energy source for this subsurface brine is not well understood. Ceres receives more solar heat than the outer solar system moons do, but not much. Radioactive decay may contribute. The fact that brines can remain liquid inside Ceres has significant implications for the potential chemical complexity of small bodies throughout the solar system. Dawn also revealed that Ceres a volcanic structure called Ahana Mons, a mountain about 4 kilometers high and 17 kilometers wide, with steeply sloped, lightly cratered flanks. The lack of craters indicates it is geologically young, perhaps formed within the last few 100 million years, possibly much more recently. It appears to be a cryovolcano, a volcano that erupts not magma but icy, salty slurry from the interior. Ahana Mons is one of the largest and clearest examples of cryovolcanism in the inner solar system. A reminder that the line between the inner and outer solar system in terms of icy geology is blurrier than we previously thought. Let me now tell you about something discovered about our solar system that should, by any reasonable assessment, have been widely known and widely discussed, but which most people, including most people who follow science news, have never heard of. It is called the galactic cosmic ray influence on the solar system, and it operates on a timescale so vast and in a way so indirect that even scientists took decades to fully appreciate its significance. The solar system moves through the Milky Way galaxy. It orbits the galactic center, completing one orbit every approximately 225 to 250 million years, a period sometimes called the galactic year or cosmic year. During this orbit, the solar system periodically passes through different regions of the galaxy: denser star-forming regions, less dense interstellar regions, the galactic arms, the gaps between the arms. And as it does, the intensity of galactic cosmic rays, high-energy particles from supernovae and other energetic events throughout the galaxy that reach the inner solar system varies. In denser regions of the galaxy with more nearby supernovae and magnetic fields, cosmic ray fluxes may be higher. In less dense regions, they may be lower. Galactic cosmic rays interact with Earth's atmosphere in ways that affect climate. They ionize molecules in the atmosphere, potentially affecting cloud formation. The Danish physicist Henrik Svensmark has proposed, controversially, and the scientific consensus is not settled on this, that variations in cosmic ray flux affect the rate of low cloud formation on Earth, and therefore affect global temperature. This remains actively debated, with some experiments at CERN's cloud facility finding evidence that cosmic ray ionization can promote aerosol formation, and other researchers arguing the effect is too small to significantly drive climate. But the broader point, that the solar system's position in the galaxy affects the cosmic ray environment, which in turn affects Earth's atmosphere, is not disputed. The solar system is not a closed, isolated system. It is embedded in the galaxy, and the galaxy affects it in ways subtle enough to take decades to recognize but potentially significant enough to have influenced the history of life on Earth. This leads to a remarkable idea, that the history of life on Earth, with its ancient mass extinctions and radiations, its ice ages and warm periods, its cyclic patterns that have puzzled geologists for generations, may be written in part by the solar system's journey through the galaxy. The clock of cosmic time, the galactic year, may be ticking in the background of Earth's biological history, shaping the rhythm of evolution in ways we are only beginning to understand. Some researchers have proposed that the roughly 60 million year periodicity in some biological extinction and diversification events in Earth's fossil record correlates with the period of the solar system's oscillation through the plane of the galaxy, a cycle that brings the solar system alternately into and out of the denser, more energetic galactic midplane. This is a controversial hypothesis, but it is taken seriously by enough researchers to warrant continued investigation. Now I want to bring together several threads we have been weaving throughout this narrative, because they converge on a single question that I think is the most important question the solar system raises for our understanding of ourselves. The question is this: are we alone? Not in the loose, philosophical sense of feeling isolated, but in the precise biological sense. Is there any other life? Any bacteria, any archaea, any microbial colony, any living thing, anywhere in the solar system beyond Earth? And the evidence, when you survey it honestly and completely, is far more equivocal than the standard popular science narrative suggests. We have found organic molecules on Mars, in comet dust, on asteroids, in the Venusian atmosphere. We have found liquid oceans under the ice of Europa, Enceladus, Titan, Ganymede, Callisto, and possibly Pluto and Ceres. We have found hydrothermal activity in the ocean of Enceladus. We have found evidence that Mars was once warm and wet and arguably habitable. We have found phosphine, possibly, in the clouds of Venus. We have found every ingredient for life: water, energy, carbon compounds, minerals, distributed throughout the solar system in greater abundance and variety than anyone imagined a generation ago. And yet, we have found no life. Not one cell. Not one metabolism. Not one biomarker unambiguous enough to declare definitively, there is something alive here. The ingredients are present. The environments are potentially habitable. But we have found no tenant. Does this mean there is no life beyond Earth? Not necessarily. We have barely looked. We have landed on Mars but explored only tiny fractions of its surface. We have sampled the atmosphere of Enceladus's plume but not the ocean below. We have studied Venus's clouds from orbit but never sent a probe into them. We have orbiters around Jupiter but no vehicle in Europa's ocean. The absence of detection is not the detection of absence. We are, in the grand scheme of searching the solar system for life, at the very beginning. We have, metaphorically, looked in a few drawers of a house the size of a continent and declared the house empty. But the silence so far, the fact that despite decades of looking, of sending robots to Mars and spacecraft to comets and orbiters to the outer planets, We have found no unambiguous sign of life, is itself a data point. Not a definitive one, but a data point.